we can go ahead and start. We've got a lot we're going to try to accomplish today, so we'll get started right away. First thing on the agenda is a hearing on HB 2328, and that is providing income tax credits for aerospace and aviation program. We'll start with a briefing from the reviser, Charles Reimer.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2328 provides for 3 different tax credits, 2 for employers and 1 for an employee, for employers and employees in the aviation sector, which means a private or public organization engaged in the manufacture of aviation or aerospace, hardware or software, aviation or aerospace maintenance, aviation or aerospace repair and overhaul, supply of parts to the aviation or aerospace industry, provision of services and support relating to the aviation or aerospace industry, research and development of aviation or aerospace technology and systems, and the education and training of aviation or aerospace personnel. So turning to page 2 of the bill, the first tax credit is for the employer, and it is a credit for tuition reimbursed to a qualified employee. And of course, qualified employer, qualified employee, and tuition are all defined terms. If you turn to just at the top of the page 2 there, you'll see qualified employer just basically is a list of business entities whose principal business activity includes the aviation sector. Qualified employee means a person newly employed on a full-time basis or first contracting in the qualified employer on a full-time basis on and after January 1st, 2022, who's been awarded an undergraduate or graduate degree or technical degree or certificate from a qualified program by an institution. And qualified program is also a defined term. That is also on page 2. You can see that on lines 12 through 21. It lists the accreditation that is required for the program and the type of program that is included within that definition. So the first tax credit is for the employer. It's for reimbursement of tuition to the employee. The credit is equal to an amount of 50% of the tuition reimbursed during the taxable year for which the credit is claimed to the qualified employee, except that in no event shall the credit exceed 50% of the average annual amount paid by a qualified employee for enrollment and instruction in the qualified program as determined by the Secretary of Revenue. So there's a limit on it, but the credit is equal to 50% of the tuition reimbursed. The credit is only applied against the business's income tax liability after all other credits allowed under the Income Tax Act. And the credit is not refundable and may not be carried forward. And in addition, this is a credit that can be claimed basically for up to the 4th year of employment. And there is a requirement that the employee be employed within 1 year prior to or following the commencement after the employee earned the undergraduate or graduate degree. You can see that on subsection B, page 2, lines 32 to 37 on that page. The second credit that this bill provides is also for the employer. It is a credit for compensation that's paid to the qualified employee. So basically there's a credit for the 1st to the 5th consecutive years of employment, and the credit is in the amount of 10% of the compensation paid by the employer to the employee. There's a limit of $15,000 annually for each qualified employee. And again, this is a credit that is to be applied after all other credits that are allowed under the Income Tax Act, and it's not refundable, and it may not be carried forward. But it is available for compensation paid to the employee in the 1st to 5th consecutive years of employment. The third credit that this bill offers is a credit for the employee. And that is a credit in the amount of $5,000. It may be claimed each year the taxpayer achieves the status of a qualified employee for the 4 taxable years succeeding the taxable year in which the credit was first allowed. This credit for the employee may be carried over or deduction if the credit is more than the employee's tax liability in the next succeeding taxable years, except it may not be carried over for deduction after the 4th taxable year. The bill provides for rule and regulation authority to the Secretary of Revenue for implementation of these credits. The bill also provides for a report to be provided by the Secretary of Revenue to the House Committee on Appropriations and the Senate Committee on Ways and Means, beginning with the 2022 legislative session. The report is to contain information regarding the cost and effectiveness of the tax credit program and any recommendations for improvement or changes. There is a sunset in the bill. If you look on page 4, no new credit shall be issued or may be earned after December 31, 2026. This was 2020 House Bill 2118 last year. The version before you is a version as amended by the House Committee. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the reviser? Seeing none. Charles, could you tell me, I remember in 2118, this credit was allowed all the way down to the machine shop level, like a little mom and pop shop, if they were supplying something to the aviation industry. Is that still the case here?
Chairman, I believe so. If you look at page 2, the definition of qualified employer, it would include a sole proprietorship in addition to the other business entities listed there. So I think that would be true. And also, if you look at the definition of aviation sector, it is fairly broad. It includes, repair, supply of parts. It's a fairly broad definition of that sector.
Okay, and then can you clarify, I know they have to work in Kansas in order to get this, but do they have to live in Kansas as well? A student that was a new hire?
I don't believe there's any requirement that they live in Kansas. They would, to take advantage of the program, they would have to have Kansas tax liability. But I do not recall seeing a specific requirement that they live in Kansas.
Okay. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the proponent portion of this hearing. We'll start with David Soffer from Department of Commerce. Welcome back, David.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, members of the committee. David Soffer, Legislative Policy Director, Kansas Department of Commerce. Happy to be here again. I'm here to testify as a proponent on HB 2328, the aviation tax credit. Aviation has been a staple of our Kansas economy for a long time, especially in south central Kansas. We are the air capital of the world. We're extremely proud of that title. In fact, if you look before kind of the pandemic and some of that Boeing 737 MAX related issues, the aerospace industry committed $7 billion to the Kansas GDP and over almost $2.3 billion in annual exports, with one of the top concentrations of aviation exports around the nation. Many of our state's households depend on a strong aviation industry. One of the things obviously that was impacted greatly, is the ability to fly during COVID and the pandemic. So certainly that is not a fault to anyone in the aviation industry. And unfortunately before that, for those that may remember, in January 2020, we began to saw some of the first impacts of that Boeing 737 MAX being sidelined. Many of our folks There were quite a few in the aviation industry that began to be furloughed or temporarily laid off as a result of that. So, unfortunately, it's been incredibly damaging to the industry. It's been 2 years that they've been trying to deal with the resiliency and just fight to survive. Obviously, there will be, much better days ahead. We just have to be able to get from point A to point B. There's some light at the end of the tunnel. But right now, we've got to get to that point. So how can we best help? We believe that this aviation tax credit will be a tremendous benefit to those companies and to those working in the industry. It will help, keep folks working, keep them in the aviation industry. And then again, on top of that, it'll be able to help out our companies, which will in turn benefit our state economy in the long run. From our end, it was presented to us. It's a no-brainer. We're happy to support it. And with that, be happy to take any questions when the time's right.
We'll go ahead and have questions now if there are any. Seeing no questions.
It might be the first time this year. Awesome. Thank you.
Wait a minute, hold on, just kidding. Next up is Jason Watkins with the Wichita Chamber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Jason Watkins, appearing for the Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. And thank you for the opportunity. If you've been on this committee for any amount of time, you're familiar with this bill. Many of you have voted for it. As a matter of fact, I think last year this got 113, 114 votes, I think. I'm going off memory, so don't hold me to that number. This is an important bill. I talk often before this committee and other committees about the importance of the aviation manufacturing sector in the state of Kansas. I'm from Wichita. Wichita is known as the air capital of the world, and I'm proud of that, but I do sometimes correct people and say it's not Wichita that's the air capital of the world, Mr. Chairman. It's the state of Kansas. We have aviation manufacturing all throughout this state. Large manufacturing presence in southeast Kansas. Johnson County does a lot with aviation manufacturing, especially on the software and instrumentation side. And when we talk about the aviation manufacturing sector, we're not just talking about companies like Textron and Spirit, Beechcraft, and others. We're talking about the advanced manufacturing machine shops. And as David mentioned, a lot of households rely on a strong aviation sector. I won't read my testimony to you, but I do allude in there that the aviation sector in Kansas has won world wars, but it's also led to, I think, a middle class that's not just an envy of the United States, but of the world. These jobs pay on average of $70,000 a year, and a lot of them don't require a 4-year degree. They have great retirement benefits, as well as other fringe benefits. Because of that, you could understand why other states and other countries are constantly, and I say in my testimony, they seek to plunder our treasure. They recruit our companies, and they recruit our workers, and it's understandable why. These are high-paying jobs, and these are primary jobs. I think Cliff Illig was before the committee last year and might have mentioned this year, Mr. Chairman. He calls them enterprises, but in the economic development world, primary jobs are what you're after because it's not, these are jobs that are creating something that get exported and they bring capital back into your area or into your state. Nothing wrong with a business that just turns money over in the local economy that doesn't really grow the economy. These primary jobs are what it's all about, and that's why other states and other nations, in fact, are so aggressive in trying to seek these aviation manufacturers and their workers. If you look at the second page of my testimony, it points out that unfortunately it's been working very well for these other states. While Kansas has seen aviation employment decrease by 18% between 2005 and 2017, Georgia has seen a 13% increase. It's a lot better than an 18% decrease. But Oklahoma has seen an increase of 93%, while North Carolina has seen a staggering increase of 141%. But even more troubling is if you look at the chart on page 2, you'll see that Kansas has lost almost 18,000 aviation jobs in a little over a decade, while just 3 other states alone have gained 16,000 aviation manufacturing jobs. When we started looking at this situation a few years ago, where were we? What was the state of aviation manufacturing in the state of Kansas? I think I kind of had the same thought that went along with the conventional wisdom of the time, which was that, well, the Great Recession was really hard on the aviation sector. And it's just been really slow to come back. But once we started looking at our numbers and looking at the numbers in other states, we were alarmed to find out we were wrong. The jobs had come back. They had come back. They just hadn't come back to Kansas. They'd gone to other states like Georgia, North Carolina, Oklahoma. I've said the last couple of years, the good news is that at least in the aviation manufacturing sector, we don't have to be primarily focused on recruiting aviation manufacturers into the state. They're here. Now, they're also in other states, and that matters, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But we don't have to go recruit Spirit, Textron. They're here. What we've needed over these last several years is a skilled workforce, a trained workforce. And that's been something that we've been missing. And that matters because when you have a Spirit who is in other states, and somebody like Airbus comes along and says, Spirit, we want you to make a wing for this plane, or we want you to manufacture this fuselage for this plane. Spirit has a choice on where they go. They can do it in Wichita, they can do it in North Carolina. They're going to do it where they can get to work the fastest and where they've got a trained and skilled workforce. The contents or the point of 2328 is not new, and it's certainly not new to other states. Other states have this, other states are using this, and this is working. Now, I think, as I told the Senate committee this morning, we would probably look a little bit foolish if we didn't address the fact that, yes, there's been a lot of layoffs in the aviation sector. First was the situation with the 737 MAX. It was grounded by the FAA because of some problems with Boeing and the instruments on that plane. And then it was quickly followed up by the COVID-19 situation. So the aviation sector, like a lot of sectors, laid off workers. The great news for Kansas and for that sector is now ramping back up. They are hiring again. The 737 MAX has been recertified to fly, and many of our machine shops, as well as our large OEMs, are hiring. But concerning is a number that I shared with you a few weeks ago, Mr. Chairman, that over the next 6 years, 60% of the folks in the aviation manufacturing sector will be eligible for retirement. So just about the time that we hope that we're fully recovered and the economy's humming again, we're going to be back in crisis mode because we don't have the workers. And while there's no silver bullet, we do need to be working with our K through 12, our tech schools, our colleges. We need to be encouraging parents that they ought to have their children look at aviation manufacturing. This isn't your grandfather's factory. These are clean, safe, highly technical places that manufacture world-class products. That's all part of the solution. But a big part of the solution is what's in House Bill 2328. It would help people get certificates, it would help people get degrees, and it would help attract workers to come into the state of Kansas. I'll make one final point. In the tax committee this morning, that's where this Senate companion was heard, the chair of the Senate Education Committee serves on tax. And she talked about what we spend on K through 12 education. And she said she doesn't like the term brain drain, but she said we spend so much educating in K through 12. We educate great engineers at our Kansas universities. We make sizable investments in engineering to see such a large number of these people leave the state. They leave the state because of jobs, but they also leave the state because there's incentives for them to do so, to go to places like Oklahoma, to go to places like North Carolina, to go to places like Georgia. I'll close by saying this, Mr. Chairman. These jobs pay, again, on average of $70,000, and they're the envy around the United States. We need to not take this sector for granted. We don't need to just defend it. We need to fight like heck to grow it. And a very important step in that process would be adoption of House Bill 2328. So I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jason. I'll open it up for questions. Any questions for Mr. Watkins? Representative Curtis, right behind you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I like what you were saying as far as that we're making these investments, we're providing these tax credits for the aviation field. But it's more than that, it's deeper than that. And I like what you were saying about the needs for the skilled, trained workforce. So I hope at some point you come back and share with us those partnerships that you guys are looking forward and looking ahead to make sure that that happens. Because if we make those investments now, we need to make sure we're making the investments in those places too, to make sure that for the long term, that we're setting ourselves up for success. So that, it's not really a question, but just a comment on what you testified on. Thank you.
So Jason, you want to, on that same note, you want to tell them about the Bell helicopter people and what they told you about why they're moving to Wichita?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And they said a lot, so I'm going to hope that I cover the part that you are referring to. You could give me a hint.
The talent, sir. Wichita State talent.
Yeah. You know, Wichita's made a lot of progress in terms of, kind of to the representative's point, on training. I told the committee this morning about going to Lakeland, Florida. My daughter was running track at Florida Southern. Lakeland, Florida, of all places, has an aviation high school. You know, Wichita now has an aviation pathway that helps put this industry in front of people at early ages. Wichita State is now taken over the Wichita Area Technical School and National Center for Aviation Training. All of that has led to an increase, of course, in the number of folks that have experience in this field. And that was one of the things that did attract Bell Helicopter to Wichita. We have a strong background. People know about aviation. And the Bell Helicopter opportunity is a big one. 50 engineers right now that have been hired, an awful lot from out of state, which is exciting. So I hope that answered your question.
You nailed it. Any other questions? I've got a couple. I'd like you to touch on, I guess, the skill level of these people that work in these factories. When we closed down, they didn't just win world wars, but they also saved a lot of lives during COVID-19, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, Mr. Chairman. We covered that during the interim hearings over the summer and fall. Spirit quickly shifted. And again, Spirit was laying off workers because of the 737 MAX situation prior to the COVID-19 crisis. But you put those two together, and they were looking at losing or having to temporarily lay off a good amount of their workforce. They started making respirators and signed a large contract with the United States federal government. Those respirators didn't just stay in the United States. Those respirators saved lives around the world. And they were making respirators at a pace much quicker and much more significant than the other manufacturers of respirators. And, you know, that's a good news story. While COVID-19 has been a horrific tragedy, there's a good news story and something we can be proud of in what Kansas workers and what Kansas advanced manufacturing figured out to do, not just to help their state and their nation, but the rest of the world. It's a great story.
Representative Hoffman.
Jason, thanks for being here. I'm looking at your chart that you have with your, I'm not understanding it. I would assume 17 is the last data you have, or is,
It's the last time that we were supplied data by the Center for Economic Development out of Wichita State.
okay. So I understand Kansas, but then Georgia should be a negative number.
No, it shouldn't. I see exactly what you're talking about. They did not. I transposed the 20,000, the 20,000 and the 29,000 should be
It should be flipped. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Somebody pointed that out to me the last time I testified on this. So I should have fixed that a year ago.
No problem. Thank you.
Representative Dodson, you have a question?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I appreciate all you're doing. I particularly appreciate Bell Helicopter coming. You know, a lot of these things, if you look at Bombardier, look at the consolidation of Beech aircraft with Cessna and Textron, look at the Boeing decision to send the Dreamliner to South Carolina and a little bit to Georgia, Airbus going to North Carolina, Air Force consolidating aircraft rebuilds in Oklahoma. I just hope we're doing enough to continue to bring in these other companies. I mean, there was another one too, you know, when Boeing decided to have some of their parts made in places other than Spirit. So you've just got a lot of work to do to continue to push to bring other aviation organizations into Wichita.
Yeah, I appreciate the sentiment, Representative, and I can tell you that the chairman and I have had conversations along those lines about what else do we need to do, what else can we do. The last thing that we can do is just take for granted this sector and this industry. I served in this legislature as a representative from the Wichita area when Boeing left. I was shocked. Our city was shocked to its core. Don't think anybody ever thought that Boeing, of all companies, would leave Wichita, Kansas, and yet they did. It's not a sector that we can take for granted. It's a sector that we have to protect, we have to fight for, and I especially appreciate what you said about recruiting. I don't think we rest on our laurels that, well, we've got Spirit, we've got Textron. We're very excited to be having Bell come to Wichita with those engineering jobs. And we're going to fight like hell to get them to bring manufacturing jobs. And I think that the state and this state legislature and this committee have to all partner in that effort.
Again, just one follow-up. This is kind of a personal observation, but when you look at the direction that in particular the military is heading, and arguably some commercial organizations like Amazon maybe, you see the future is a lot of robotics, a lot of RPV or UAV. Fort Riley is doing a lot, as is Salina, to create corridors all the way perhaps to Denver. We've got a lot of flat, wide open space where it's hard to hit something. And I just think, you know, if we look in that sector that's emerging right now, there may be a lollipop in that for us. I mean, if you're looking for great workers, we've certainly got them, because a lot of those guys aren't back to work yet.
Yeah, agree, 100%.
Any further questions? I want to touch on one last thing. Cliff, you mentioned Cliff Illig and his definition of industry. Those 18,000 jobs that we lost and that other states gained, we're not talking about just income tax on the $80,000 to $100,000 jobs. We're talking about property tax. They buy homes, they live there, they pay property tax, they support their schools. They spend their money in Kansas, and it turns over and turns over, and it comes back to us tenfold. So there is a fiscal note to this, But I think in the long run, these are jobs that are going to be new jobs. And I can tell you, when you took me down to Spirit and we toured Spirit, it was one of the things they said was, we'd love to grow more in Kansas, but we've got to make business decisions. And so, in your opinion, does this put us right there with Oklahoma and Georgia and North Carolina? Or is there, what differences are there in the programs?
Well, I think this, if we can get it enacted into law, I think would go a long way towards the workforce development piece, which is of primary concern to these manufacturers, right? You can get contracts, but if you don't have workers, can't manufacture product, can't make any money. And so 23, 28 would help in that workforce development sphere. When the Bell helicopter guys were in town, you know, they talked about offers that they get from other states, where other states come in and say, if you'll come here, we'll buy the land, we'll build the building, then we'll lease it to you over 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. That's how aggressive some of these other states are getting. And I'm not going to tell you that we have to do everything that every other state does. There are some things that are special about Kansas. As the Bell guys said, they liked the folks that they met in Kansas. They liked the workers that they were meeting. They trusted that they would do a good job. But I don't want to paint a picture that passage of 2328 completely is going to put us back at the top of the list for every company that's looking for a place to go to manufacture airplanes or airplane parts. It's a big step, it's a great step, and we need to do it. But we'll need to continue to work together to figure out how to be number one if that's what we want to be.
Okay, seeing no further questions. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that's all we have for in-person proponent. Is there anyone else here that wants to testify for this bill? Okay, seeing none. We don't have any opponents or neutrals to this bill. And we do have several, 6 written proponents. Please review those. We'll probably try to work this bill tomorrow if we have time after the star bonds, or Wednesday. We'll go ahead and close the hearing on HB 2328. Open the hearing on HB 2442. This is the school liability bill. This is another one of those bills that came back to us that's fairly identical to the original bill, so we weren't really going to take testimony on it because it hasn't changed other than one thing that I think the school boards wanted. And we'll go ahead and let Charles Reimer let us know what the bill does.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. So as the chairman observed, this bill is essentially the same as the bill that the committee heard back on February 22nd. As the committee recalls, this provides liability protection for businesses that engage in high school work-based learning programs with respect to civil liability for bodily injury to students and also for students' negligent acts or omissions. The changes that the chairman referenced, you can see on page 2 of the bill in the sections that amend current law that permits the school board of education to purchase insurance. In the bill that the committee heard back in February, the language provided that school-sponsored activities would include, but not limited to, actually that's added, but travel provided by a business or the school to and from or participation in work-based learning programs. So this bill removes a reference to travel provided by the business, both in section 2 and in section 3. There's also just some technical changes to the language, just better wording, which are not intended to be substantive. So with that, I would, happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions? Seeing none. Okay, so committee, there was if you remember the school boards, they had testimony against the bill because of the transportation. They did not want to hold harmless a business that was carrying, driving around one of the students. And so we removed that from the bill, and then just a little bit of cleanup. So there really are no other changes, and I believe the school boards are now neutral on that. You can see everybody's testimony. If you look up HB 2351 in the S drive, those will all be in there. And so with that, I'll go ahead and close the hearing on HB 2442. That's it on the hearings for today. We do have several bills that we want to try to work. If we can get to them, just give me a minute to collect my thoughts here. I would call your attention to Senate Bill 66. That is the Angel tax credit bill. Senate Bill 66. With a motion on Senate Bill 66, Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move we pass out Senate Bill 66 favorably for passage.
Can I get a second on that? Seconded by Representative Clayton. Discussion on the bill. We do have 2 amendments for this bill. The first one was a technical cleanup that we did when we heard our own version of this bill. And the second one was the one that went in on the floor that addressed people with disabilities and tax credits for investments they make in their home in order to bring the home, to make it more usable for them. I believe, Charles, are both of those in the same amendments?
Chairman, those are drafted in 2 separate amendments.
You go ahead and send them both over
Okay.
to Cindy, and she'll circulate them. Also put them in the S drive when you get a chance. Go ahead and explain the disability tax credit. We currently have a disability tax credit on record as statute, and what Representative Toplicker did was basically bring it up to date. He changed the parameters to add the inflationary factors that have been since we created this statute. I believe it went on the floor unanimously. And I figured I'd just save us all the time on the floor and go ahead and put it on in here, because it's kind of a long deal out there. Does everybody have a copy of both amendments? The other amendment was given to us by the Department of Commerce just to fix a couple of things and Charles, I'll let you discuss that.
Chairman, the amendment brought by the Department of Commerce was, as you noted, just to fix a few things. On page 2, there is a provision just adding any additional funds instead of the phrase "its next series of funding" with respect to debt instruments there on page 2. Just kind of a cleanup from the department. The next change is on page 3 of the bill, just to specify that the time period when the department is going to take a look at the tax liability of an investor is going to be at the time of the investment in a qualified Kansas business, to make sure that there's the investor does not have a current tax liability. So it specifies the time that the department will look at to make that determination. Another a couple of other changes are on the last page of the bill, just to sort of clarify, the situation when angel investors might face disallowance of the credit. So it just specifies that, you know, the angel investors in a qualified Kansas business who lawfully make an investment will not have their tax credits disallowed solely due to the business losing its designation as a qualified Kansas business. So it just cleans up that language there, and just makes clear that angel investors need to lawfully make the investment, and then they won't have their tax credits disallowed for the sole reason that the business has lost its designation as a qualified Kansas business. So again, these are from the Department of Commerce. They're just things the Department of Commerce wanted to clean up the bill.
Any questions for Charles on that amendment? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and offer that as amendment number 1. Can I get a second on it? Seconded by Representative Hoffman. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll close on the amendment. All in favor, say aye. All against, say no. Ayes have it. I'll go ahead and offer the second amendment and get a second on that. Representative Dodson, any discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close on the amendment. All in favor, say aye. All against, say no. Ayes have it. Motion passes. Any other discussion on the angel investment tax credit bill? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move we pass out SB 66 favorable for passage as amended.
Committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Clayton. All in favor, say aye. All against, say no. Ayes have it. Motion passes. I'll draw your attention to Senate Bill number 65. That is the High Performance Incentive Fund Workforce Training Program kit and cur bill that we passed out before. Go ahead and open discussion on that. We'll get a brief description of what the bill does to refresh our memory. It's Senate Bill 65. Charles Reimer.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 65 pertains, as the chairman indicated, to the High Performance Incentive Fund. This is a bill, as the committee will recall, that decoupled the current workforce training program participation requirements from the High Performance Incentive Fund.
Any questions on the refresher? Seeing none, for discussion on the bill, SB 65.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move we pass out SB 65 favorable for passage. Seconded by Kessler.
Seconded by Representative Kessler. Discussion on the bill. Representative Dodson.
As I read through this, maybe to Charles, are there changes from the House bill that we did a couple of weeks ago?
Representative, I'm not sure I understand your question. No, this would be the same bill that you heard. I may not be understanding your question, sir.
Okay, well, I'll just read it again. But as I was reading it, I thought I'd seen this before.
Representative Dodson, this is identical, correct me if I'm wrong, to the House version that we passed out a few weeks back.
That was really my question. I'm sorry I wasn't very clear, but so they didn't make any changes to this?
Charles, were there any changes? I'm getting a no from the Department of Commerce.
Chairman, I don't believe so.
Thanks.
There's an issue on the Senate side that they need us to pass their bill so that they can concur to it rather than go to conference, because there could be a lot of changes that will be detrimental to the bill. And so the intent is to move the contents of SB 91 into this bill. That's the other, that's the transferability of these credits. So they have a lot to do with each other. So we're going to move that into this. That'll free up a vehicle so that if we pass the the aviation tax credit, we can put it in that Senate bill, send it over, and they can concur, and we can get it on the books. So there's the plan. Any further discussion? Okay, I do have that one amendment that I just discussed, the contents of the transferability of these tax credits on SB 91. Charles, could you send that amendment to Cindy?
Chairman, I have done so.
Okay, thank you. Does everybody have that? And Charles, you can explain it.
Chairman, members of the committee, just as the chairman indicated, what this amendment does is it places Senate Bill 91, which, as the chairman indicated, is the bill that also dealt with the high performance incentive fund that just provided for the transferability of the tax credit. So it inserts the provisions of Senate Bill 91 into Senate Bill 65.
Any questions for the reviser? I'll go ahead and offer that amendment. Can I get a second? Representative Long. Any discussion on the amendment of combining the two bills? Item seeing none. I'll go ahead and close on that. All in favor say aye. All against say no. Motion passes. Any other discussion on SB 65? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move we pass SB 65 out of committee favorably for passage as amended.
Committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Kessler. All in favor say aye. All against say no. Motion passes. We've got one more. I draw your attention to SB 90, the Kansas Rural Housing Incentive District. We'll get a description from Charles Reimer.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 90, as the committee will recall, is the bill that dealt with the Kansas Rural Housing Incentive District Act. It permitted the use of bond proceeds for vertical renovations of certain buildings, old buildings within within a central business district, as certified, as permitted by the Secretary of Commerce. In addition, there was a restriction that the improvements be for residential purposes and that they be made only to the second or higher floors of the building. Commercial improvements for commercial purposes were not allowed. That is what this bill did.
Any questions for the reviser? Seeing none. Oh. Representative Burrows. Sorry, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that this is the one that took out reduced the county size down to 80,000 and did the 60 or the 6,000 attendance or the residency requirement.
Charles, can you give us a residency requirement on that? Or
Yeah,
was there one?
Chairman, members of the committee, and Representative, I apologize, I forgot about that. Yes, there was an additional change in the bill, and that is that it just removed on page 1, lines 15 and 16, it removes in the definition of city requirement that for eligibility for the program, that a city be in a county with a population of less than 80,000. So that was removed by this bill.
Representative Burrows.
No, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to be mindful that by lowering that number, I think it encompasses more rural areas and allows those rural tax credits to be used. So I just remember reading the bill, and that number caught my attention, so I just wanted to make sure it was still there, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks for pointing that out. Any other questions for the reviser? Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had talked in committee when this first came out that paragraph D on the first page, beginning on line 24, that was actually redundant and confusing, so that maybe should be removed from the bill.
Could you restate that?
Page 1 of the bill, beginning on line 24, that paragraph D is redundant and confusing, and there was discussion about removing that from the bill. We defined the population requirement up above.
Right, and it would be wise to make a change to this so that we'll have something to conference on, but does that change the bill, Charles?
Chairman, as you may recall, there was a discussion about, as a representative noted, a discussion about that when the committee heard the bill. And it was my belief that there was not really a conflict with respect to between county and city. And I'm certain David can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that he had also indicated that from the Department of Commerce's perspective, there was not a conflict. So certainly it can be changed if the committee wishes, but I don't believe it is an inherent problem or conflict within the bill.
Representative Highland, does that answer your question?
Yeah, he stated it's a personal problem. I can deal with that.
Any other questions for the reviser? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and open SB 90 for discussion. Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move.
Hold on just a second. Representative Shu, would you like to bring this amendment? Increase your batting average, or this motion?
I'm okay. I want to come by it honestly, so I will defer to Representative Long.
Okay. Representative Long? Discussion on the bill. I need a motion to pass it out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move we pass out SB 90 favorably for passage.
I'm going to Representative Shu seconds the motion. Discussion. Representative Highland, did you want to bring that amendment to scratch D?
Apparently I was the only one that bothered, so no, not at this time.
We do need to make a change to this bill so we can conference.
Remove paragraph D on the first.
Okay. Representative Sutton. Representative Sutton seconds the motion. Representative Dodson for discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to try to recall here, this bill is oriented towards both cities and counties. I think the objective was for small cities, that is less than 60,000, and to get rid of them being in a very large county. So we took out the 80. And the other one was directed towards the counties less than 60,000.
I think that there could be a conflict if there was more than one city that was in the 50,000 range in the county that would put them over the 60. If you have them both capped at 60, you really don't need the city, you just need the county.
Well, as long as it's below 60, that's what we're trying to achieve. In other words, it's a small city. Then if the county has a project, as long as the county is below 60,000, they're also eligible. I may be misreading it. Maybe Ron and I better.
Charles, you want to chime in on that?
Chairman, I don't really have anything to add except the program is aimed at cities or counties. If you look at page 2, section 1 just starts out by saying any city or county which has established a rural housing incentive district may use the proceeds of special obligation bonds. So it is, the program is directed at cities or counties.
Charles, if we had two cities of, say, 50,000 in the same county, would that not qualify?
Again, maybe David can correct me if I'm wrong, but since the language is or, that a city or a county can establish a rural housing incentive district, there may not necessarily be a conflict because we removed, the definition of city now just refers to a city with a population of less than 60,000. So it's independent of the definition of county. But I would defer to David if he has a different opinion on if there's any conflict.
David, can you opine to this? I don't want to mess your bill up.
David Sofer, Legislative Policy Director at Kansas Department of Commerce. The bill should not conflict. If there are two cities that have 50,000 in population, they both should be able to be eligible. We don't necessarily, in fact, this actually speaks to the issue that Representative Sutton had brought up to us, which was, again, so in his case, the city of Edgerton is in Johnson County. That county is obviously much bigger, but the city of Edgerton is quite small, and then there could be the city of Gardner, which also has a smaller population. So in that case, if both those cities want to be able to participate, we certainly would welcome that, even though they're part of Johnson County, which has a much higher population. In their specific cases, it may make sense to utilize RHID, and certainly we would want to be able to make sure we provide that opportunity. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. So are you for it or not?
We're for it.
Okay. That answers the question. Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, David,
Go ahead.
how are you on the amendment of cutting out the definition of county? Lines 24 through 28 on page 2.
So not having the bill right in front of me, I was actually pulling it up as I got called up here. Again, I'd probably just double check with the revisor's office and make sure we're not messing it up if we pull it out. But from our end, we don't see a need for a definition of county because it's strictly, the way we want to be able to take RHID is simply look at it from a city-to-city perspective. So certainly if there are multiple cities that want to utilize RHID in a county, we don't see why that should be an issue. From our end, the county population shouldn't play no significance as far as whether a city can utilize RHID. And then in a county, if the county for whatever reason is doing the project, again, if they want to utilize it in multiple cities, as long as none of those cities equal a population over 60,000, we don't believe that should be an issue.
Right. Thank you
Representative
for
Long.
answering that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So David, an unincorporated city wouldn't qualify for the rural housing incentive, right? Unincorporated in the county?
I don't necessarily know why they wouldn't. Again, I think it's by population, but
To me, that's the only reason to leave the county designation in.
yeah, I mean, again, if you want to play it safe and just change the effective date, that's always a plus. From our end, again, I think we want to be able to just make sure that every community that's under a population of 60,000 can utilize it. So if there is a question, and certainly you all want to play it safe, by all means, go for that as well. But obviously, we leave it up to you.
Chairman?
Representative, you make a good point. The definition of city does say incorporated city. Charles?
Yes, Chairman, I was just going to make that point that you made.
Representative Ralph, you don't have your hand up, but Penny for your thoughts, sir.
Thank you. I'm wondering, because I'm looking at page 2, the new section 2, and as you referenced earlier, where it says any city or county which has established a RHID may use the proceeds of special obligation bonds. So the district there appears couldn't be established by a city, or it can be established by a county. If we leave a definition of city in there, then we know that it has to be a city under 60,000 for all of those. We also, though, are saying there that a county can establish a district, and if we take out the definition of county, then we're saying any county in the state of Kansas, regardless of population, could create a district, as I read the definition. So because the definition of county we're talking about taking out places the limitation of 60,000 on there. Now, that's a quick reading right now, but I'm wondering whether that's our concern.
I'd say so. Representative Hoffman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm looking at lines 15 and 16, it looks like the old language was in a county with a population of less than 80,000. So we could simply change on line 26, the 60,000 to 80,000. If we wanted to leave it in there, and that would be a change that you could then talk to the Senate about.
Representative Highland.
I'm not an attorney, but if you're saying 60,000, in an earlier conversation, you said 2 cities of 50,000. But if you limit the size of your county to 60,000, does that not eliminate the 2 cities?
Representative Ralph.
At that point, I am an attorney and stayed at the Holiday Inn last night, but but I think what goes on there is in those instances, if the city is the one creating the district, they just have to satisfy the less than 60,000. So if you had 2 cities, each doing their districts, 50,000 each, that county may have a limitation of 60 or 80 or whatever we make it, but the county isn't the one establishing the district, so the county doesn't have to qualify in that instance, would be how I would read that.
Any other attorneys want to weigh in? Representative Miller.
Well, someone used the term unincorporated city. There is no such thing. To be a city, you must be incorporated.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make a substitute motion to leave in 24 through 28, but change 60,000 to 80,000.
Representative Sutton seconds that. I think that's a safer change. Any discussion on that? Representative Dodson, you have a question?
I'd just like him to restate, but I'd also, I mean, we're in the definitional part, right? So A says city, and then D says county. So in A, we said city less than 60,000 and further described it as being in a county with less than 80. We took the 80 out, so the 50,000 and 50,000 pertains. In other words, you could have 3 or 4 cities in there, as long as the cities are less than 60. In D, as long as the county is less than 60,000, the county can also have a project. That's what I thought we were trying to get at. But if you'll restate your motion, I wasn't listening carefully enough.
Right, and I'm leaving D in, except I'm changing on line 26, 60,000 to 80,000 to match up with used to be on line 16. So now a county with a population of less than 80,000 could create a district in their county, or a city or 2 cities with each having less than 60,000. They could each create districts.
I think that's more in line with the original intent of the bill, the original bill, and when they moved the 80,000, they just made it 60,000 to be uniform, but I think 80, I'm safe with that, and I can take that to conference. Any other discussion on the substitute amendment? Seeing none, Representative, you can close.
I close.
Committee, you heard the motion. Seconded by Representative Sutton. All in favor, say aye. All against, say no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion passes. Any further discussion on SB 90? Seeing none, Representative, you can close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move we pass out SB 90 favorably for passage as amended.
Committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Hsu. All in favor, say aye. All against, say no. Motion passes. That's all we have in the chamber for today, boys, girls. Thank you very much. We'll adjourn. And tomorrow we'll, I'll check with the reviser. Tomorrow we do have a hearing, but that should be a short hearing. And then hopefully we can get to work on the Star Bond bill if the amendments are ready. If they're not, we'll work some of these other ones. Thank you.